The ancient war of the Magi. When its flames at last receded, only the charred husk of a world remained. Even the power of magic was lost. In the 1,000 years that followed, iron, gunpowder, and steam engines took the place of magic, and life slowly returned to the barren land. Yet there now stands one who would reawaken the magic of ages past, and use its dread power as a means by which to conquer all the world. Could anyone truly be foolish enough to repeat that mistake? So anyway, I'm that guy Brickroad, and this is Final Fantasy VI. More specifically, this is Final Fantasy VI Advance, because this version of the game has some extra stuff that got added in when it was re-released on the Game Boy Advance in 2006, I think. Man, it's weird to think that this game is... that this version of the game is now 10 years old. So I have decided that the time is nigh to maybe relax my exclusion of RPGs, and specifically JRPGs, on my YouTube channel. Traditionally, I didn't like doing Let's Plays of that style of game because they tend to be very long. And doing Let's Plays of very long games, I don't enjoy watching them, is the problem. And because I don't enjoy watching them, I kind of extrapolate that onto everyone else and assume that nobody else enjoys watching them either. But over the years, my viewers have repeatedly told me that no, Brickroad, that is not the case. We would like to see you Let's Play more JRPGs on the channel. And the few times that I've done JRPGs on the channel, people have really enjoyed them. In the past couple of years, I've done more long games than is usual, because I opened up basically Let's Play suggestions on my Patreon. If you are a big Patreon supporter, at least for 1 month, I do give you the opportunity to select a Let's Play, and that's where we've gotten some of the longer Let's Plays on this channel from the past couple years. That's where we got, for example, Parasite Eve 2 or Metal Gear Solid 3, and and I think of those games and those series in terms of, yeah, they're very long, but I've kind of settled on 20 minutes for a YouTube video, where actually my personal rule of no RPGs on the channel was set at a time when YouTube very strictly enforced a 10-minute limit on video content. So it's time. It's time to go back and look at some of these old RPGs, and I did a straw poll. I sent it out on Twitter because I decided if I'm going to do this, we're going to start with a Final Fantasy game. And because Final Fantasy is my favorite video game series, period. I like this series better than Mega Man, better than Zelda, better than Mario. I've spent more hours with Final Fantasy games in the course of my life than any other game series. Easily. Final Fantasy VI in particular, I've probably put... It's hard to say, because I've played this game so many times, start to finish, and every time I play it, I learn new stuff about it. If I had to ballpark it, I mean, at least several hundred hours, at least. No question about that. And this version of the game has been my go-to version ever since it came out in 2006. It's actually going to be the 4th Final Fantasy Let's Play that I've put on the channel, though. Because a few years ago, I did Final Fantasy I as a Let's Play. And then a few years after that, let's hop into the config here. What needs to be changed? I think this is all fine. We want cursor on, remember. Auto dash we want on. Even though we can't dash in Magitek armor, this is probably all fine. Let's go ahead and put on my favorite window pattern, which is this one here. And yeah, that's good. Well, we can live with this. So yeah, I did a Let's Play of Final Fantasy I. That was actually a suggestion by one of my viewers. At the time, we were doing a fundraiser for the forum that we all posted on, and somebody a viewer of mine by the name of John B. and his son James asked for Final Fantasy 1. So I did a Let's Play of Final Fantasy 1. I did the NES version. I did it at super speed. And then a little bit after that, I did a really fun series of Chocobo Racing for the PlayStation 1. If you don't know what Chocobo Racing is, it's basically the Final Fantasy kart racer that they released on PlayStation 1. It's super fun. I recommend playing it. I don't know how you can play it nowadays, except to just buy an old copy of the disc. I don't think it's on PlayStation Network. At one point, Square Enix did have plans to revisit the Chocobo Racing series. They were going to put out a Chocobo Racing game on the 3DS. That unfortunately got canceled, which is sad. But it's still a pretty fun game. So I did the Let's Play of that, and then more recently, just earlier this year, I did a walkthrough video series of the Pitios Ruins from Final Fantasy 15. The Pitios Ruins is a really crazy, huge, just massively epic platforming dungeon in Final Fantasy 15 that really blew my mind. Like, I was not expecting something like that in that game. So this is my 4th Final Fantasy Let's Play on the channel. I've got other Final Fantasy content here and there on the channel. I'm sure I'm forgetting. Like, I know I've got some old videos from when I was doing, like, Final Fantasy solo runs in screenshot Let's Play form for a web forum. And there's probably some other stuff I'm forgetting. And then if you read my blog, which I don't know if anybody still reads it. I don't update it as often as I used to. But I... just looking through my blog, like, there's so much just Final Fantasy content on there. I clearly love playing and talking about this series. Last year on Twitch, I played pretty much the entire series. We did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, 2, pretty much all back-to-back. As I'm recording this, I'm currently playing through Final Fantasy XII, the Zodiac Age. I'm playing through World of Final Fantasy on PS4. And I'm always playing something in the Final Fantasy series. I've always got something on my plate. So I guess I'll take this, I'm going to assume that everybody watching already has played Final Fantasy VI. I'm going to assume you guys know about this game, what the story is, and that you're not watching this series in order to kind of fill in any holes of knowledge that you have. I'm going to assume you're watching the series because you're a viewer of mine who enjoys this game and wants to just experience it again. So I'm not going to talk a lot, at least not in this episode, about what's going down in this story here. We are going to pop this save point, though. A strange light fills the air. No, I'm fine. I know all about save points. Thank you. So what I'm going to do instead for this first video is talk about kind of my history with the Final Fantasy series. Because I'm old school. I'm an old fart. I turned 35 this summer. I'm old enough to remember the original Final Fantasy. I was there. 1990, when that game came out on NES. There wasn't a series yet. There was no, like, Final Fantasy mythology to learn. There was no traditions set yet. Literally none of the beloved characters that we associate with the series, Cloud, Terra, Cecil, Lightning, none of these characters existed yet. There was no Chocobo music. There were no Chocobos. There was nothing at all. All there was the NES cartridge, and the only iconic bit of what we would now think of as iconic Final Fantasy were the white, red, and black mages, basically. That was it in that game. And we played that game over and over again as kids, and we sucked at it. We were terrible at it. I go into a lot of this detail about Final Fantasy 1 in that Final Fantasy 1 Let's Play, but that's where I started. We started playing Final Fantasy 1 before we even knew that, like, what RPG meant. Like, we didn't have any context for what to even call that style of game, but we did know that we'd never seen that style of game before. Oh, we just shot this man's shell, didn't we? Okay, we are going to heal. because he's going to retaliate. He might kill Wedge here, which is fine. That's okay. Like, he might... Maybe we gotta shock him twice before he gigavolts us. In any case, we gotta wait for him to pop his head back out. We played Final Fantasy 1 over and over and over and over again, and the first inkling that there was ever gonna be anything else in the series, I was in 5th grade, and some kid brought his Nintendo Power to school, and it had just a screenshot down in the corner. There was no information, no nothing, just a blurry screenshot. Like, I don't even think they used a video capture device in those days. I think, like, somebody just set up a tripod at a game show or something, and the screenshot was the first exposure to Final Fantasy II. What was being called in the US as Final Fantasy II. Obviously, in Japan, they were already up to Final Fantasy IV. I didn't know there was any other Final Fantasy games. And what blew my mind about that little screenshot was it was a screenshot of a battle, of the battle screen, and the characters were standing in like a zigzag pattern. Obviously, if you play modern Final Fantasy games, you know there's like a front row, back row dynamic in your battle. You put your knights and your soldiers and things on the front line, and then you put your like ranged attackers and your casters on the back line. And that blew my mind. I mean, Final Fantasy 1, you have that same aspect. You've got 4 party ranks, and you put your fighter in the front rank and your black mage in the back rank. But this zigzag pattern, I could not comprehend what that could possibly mean. So Final Fantasy, I'm gonna stick to the correct numbering scheme. I played Final Fantasy 2, but I'm not gonna call it that. I'm gonna call it Final Fantasy 4. We played that. My cousin owned a Super Nintendo. I didn't have one at the time, and he bought a copy. I played Final Fantasy 4, so that was my first exposure to what I eventually learned was a lot of the Final Fantasy traditions. Chocobos, summonings, of course it carried on the tradition of crystals and all this sort of thing. I didn't know that they were already established series traditions. I had no concept of that. Every clock in Final Fantasy VI has an elixir. Just keep that in mind. So that was my second exposure to the series, was Final Fantasy IV, and to this day it's probably my favorite Final Fantasy game. Like, it's really hard to get past a game that you spent that much time with and cherished that much at such a young age for so many years. I replayed Final Fantasy I and Final Fantasy IV every single year all the way into my adulthood, repeatedly, just over and over. So even though 4 is not the best game in the series, we're not going to change anybody's names. We're done here. I still think I'd have to call it my favorite. Unfortunately, I put up a straw poll. I said, okay guys, I'm going to start playing some more RPGs for the channel. I'm going to start with a Final Fantasy game because that's my favorite series ever. Which of these 4 games would you like to see? And then I put up the 4 Final Fantasy games that I know the best, that I didn't think would blow out into 200 episode series, which is why I didn't put like 13 on there. And those 4 games were Final Fantasy 3, 4, 5, and 6. And so I put up the straw poll, and Final Fantasy 4 got like almost no votes. Almost nobody wanted Final Fantasy 4. A couple people did vote for don't play any of them, like no RPGs on the channel, we don't want to see that. And I agree with those people, but we're in the minority. Sorry, if you're one of the people that voted that way, we got outvoted. I'm sorry. More people want to see Final Fantasy games than don't want to see Final Fantasy games. But yeah, Final Fantasy 4 got almost like just a small amount of the vote, which is too bad. A lot of people did vote for 3. I think 3 ended up coming in second place. I think the reason for that is because a lot of American Final Fantasy fans don't have a really good conception of 3. Like, it's not really on their radar. We didn't get a copy of Final Fantasy 3 in this territory until the DS version came out. And the version I was offering to play was the NES version with the Onion Kids. I guess the Famicom version would be a better way to describe it, but it gets really confusing when you talk about the early Final Fantasy series, because the numbering was wrong, and things weren't called the same thing between the Japanese and North American regions. By the time Final Fantasy, I want to say like 9 came out, which would have been 2000 or so, things had started to kind of shake out and become more, more codified. Like, spells would now have the same name across the series. There was no longer a weird, oh, does this game have Fyra and Firaga, or does it have Fire 2 and Fire 3? The first version of this game that I played was called Final Fantasy 3. It was on the Super Nintendo, and it actually had Fire 2, and Fire 3. That's the actual like Final Fantasy naming scheme hadn't been codified in English yet. And this game is the first RPG, the first JRPG that came out that plays at being cinematic. And it did that at a time and on technology that wasn't designed to be at all cinematic. This game became kind of the standard for what a JRPG was supposed to be. I mean, obviously a few years after this game came out, the PlayStation launched, we got Final Fantasy VII, and then for a few years, yeah, every JRPG kind of tried to be Final Fantasy VII. But this game does some things for its narrative that I'd never seen a JRPG do before. It pioneered a lot of these things. There are a lot of sequences in this game where you have gameplay but no combat. You have to figure out how to move in the world in kind of strange situations. Final Fantasy IV didn't have anything like that. And actually, I've lied to you. This wasn't my third exposure to the series. In those years, I also played Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, which is another game that you might see on this channel in the years down the road. I played Final Fantasy Legend 2 on the Game Boy, and then I've played Final Fantasy 6 after that. But this game really steps up, like these cutscenes we're watching, this like sepia tone flashback scene where Terra's memory is being erased by a wicked clown, and then she burns a bunch of Imperial soldiers to death. Like, this kind of storytelling wasn't present in previous Final Fantasy games. Of course, I skipped Final Fantasy V because it didn't get released in North America, but even going back to play it, it didn't really do this kind of storytelling. It stuck to the, like, kind of cartoony, people hop around and, like, just weird coincidences happen. There's kind of comic relief in every scene. And that was the kind of style that Final Fantasy V went for. I mean, Final Fantasy VI has scenes where your dialogue options are meaningful. They have lasting effects on the game. It has scenes where you can make choices that permanently impact who is in your party for the rest of the game. The player has control in this game over the narrative in ways that you did not in previous Final Fantasy games. And that's what really captured my imagination playing this game for the first time as a kid. It also happens to be like the fan favorite game of probably both my generation and the generation of gamers after mine. Final Fantasy VI is regarded by a lot of people to be the best game in the series. I don't think it's the best game in the series. That's a statement I'll probably have to unpack as we're going forward through the Let's Play. But like I said, I put up a straw poll, I put 4 options on it, and Final Fantasy VI would have been my number 4 on that straw. Well, my number 5. My number 1 would have been, hey, Brickroad, don't play RPGs, that's a bad idea. But Final Fantasy VI would have been my last choice out of the 4 games that I put up there. So not only am I in the minority opinion of whether or not I should play RPGs on this channel, but I'm also in the minority of which RPGs those should be. But the reason this would be my last choice out of the 4 games I offered is because it has the largest, like, cutscene to gameplay ratio. There's a lot of long stretches of this game, in the first half at least, where you're not really doing anything interesting, you're just kind of pushing through the cutscene, which if you're playing the game for the first time is magnificent, because the story is really good, the characters are really memorable, the writing is pretty fun, the dialogue is really punchy. But on replays, like, like the opera house scene loses its magic. The whole scene in the Esper world is just kind of drags a bit. If you haven't played this game and this is all spoilers to you, then I don't know what. It's a 20-year-old game. There's go get to it. Go out there and play it. What's wrong with you? So what we're gonna do here basically is we're gonna set lock right there. We are going to... Is this the party with Mog? It is. Okay, so Mog's in the party here. We're going to actually strip him naked. We're going to set him up over here. So he's going to get attacked in a second. And then we're going to take this third party and set it up over here, and then none of these guys will be able to reach Terra. And this is how we're going to do it. So I guess if I'm looking at the 4 games that I offered, my first choice would have been 3, I think. Because 3 is a game that I think a lot of people at least in the territories where I live, haven't played. Because, again, we didn't have access to it when we were kids. And the only copy you can get legally is either the DS copy or the Steam copy, which are essentially the same game, but it's the 3D version. It has like the low poly characters. It doesn't have the Onion Kids. It has Lunith and his gang. A lot of the jobs were remixed and remastered. It's functionally a different game. Whereas this is just pretty much a port of Final Fantasy VI. The updated version of Final Fantasy III is functionally a totally new game. So the old Famicom version of Final Fantasy III kind of lost to time as far as North American audiences are concerned, which is too bad because it's a really, really cool game, and it does a lot of things. Like from the perspective of like gameplay, it's a much deeper game than Final Fantasy IV, which came after it on bigger hardware, badder hardware. It's also the one I think it's been the longest since I've replayed out of all these games. Because, yeah, last year on Twitch, I played pretty much the whole series. I went back and replayed pretty much everything. And we pretty much played them in order, so... And then, since then, I've replayed Final Fantasy V this year because we did the Final Fantasy V Fiesta. You know what? I'm going to take you down Lock. And then we'll take Mog's team to go fight the boss. Because I'm pretty sure Margaret and Moggy are just doomed right here. Because that... Yeah, he's going to use Snowstorm. He's going to knock out 2 of my Muggles. But then we'll win the day here. Alright, very good. So we'll move Locke out of the way. We will pop a potion in here. So we're not going into this boss fight with damage. Then we just go fight the boss. We'll be good to go. So people did ask whether or not I would do like a special kind of run for this game, because I said if Final Fantasy V won the poll and I did it, I would do it by 4-job Fiesta rules, because that's pretty much the only way I play that game anymore. The Final Fantasy V 4-job Fiesta, which, if you don't know, you basically get assigned 4 random jobs, and those are the only jobs you're allowed to use over the course of the game. Which sounds boring when you first hear it, but it's actually... It forces you to learn the game on a deeper level than you otherwise would. Oh, okay, yeah, we'll just do that. With any luck, Mog will dance the Twilight Requiem. He'll do Snare. Wow, I was hoping he would snare the leader, the guard leader back there, the masked hook man back there, but he did not. That's fine. We should have this now. Because, there we go, that's what I wanted. It's kind of subtractive game design, in a way, because Final Fantasy V has all these wacky jobs, but in restricting what jobs you're allowed to use for a particular run, you actually get much deeper gameplay, in my opinion. So I do like the Fiesta rules for Final Fantasy V. I have the same opinion about the Zodiac Age, the Final Fantasy XII remake that just came out. The vanilla version of the game, which I loved on PlayStation 2 10 years ago, but everybody has the same licenses. Everybody has access to all the same stuff. You can make everybody do anything. The new version of the game, you have to pick a job. Everybody's got a different license board, which means everybody's restricted to like 1 or 2 particular weapon types or magic types. And so you really have to learn the ins and outs of lots of different types of weapons and magic. It makes for a more robust game. I don't know a way to make Final Fantasy VI more interesting in that regard, because it's already pretty interesting. It's got that subtractive design built into the characters. You'll be able to give everybody espers and teach everybody all the magic, that's true, but each character has their own unique abilities, each character has their own unique equipment list. They're already pretty well distinct and defined as characters. So any kind of challenge run of Final Fantasy VI, it's not going to make the game more interesting, it's just going to make the game more challenging. And this is not a game that I want to be challenged by. So let's go ahead and give Terra and Locke those shields that we grabbed. And I'm going to pop a save right here. And I'll meet you guys back here for episode 2 of Final Fantasy VI. Or 3. I don't know if I'm going to split this video. Whatever, I'll see you in the next episode.
Shoutouts to A Cardboard Box for sponsoring this video, and to everybody who helps make my channel possible by supporting me on Patreon.